Hello everyone, this is Mini Ninja speaking. As you might be getting a sense of deja vu in this particular scene you have in front of you, yes, technically it is true, we have talked about the Bootleg Ryuko Matoi video on this channel, actually one of my earlier videos if I recall correctly. However, the reason we're looking at it again is because I noticed something from a D-Star video not that long ago when he did his own review of the bootleg, and that would be that the quality of the figure, at least what he had in his hand, was more than a few cosmetic changes. It actually seems to have changed a few more different quality issues than I had anticipated, so I figured in order to kind of keep things more up to date, kind of like what I did for the Android 18 figure reviews, we're taking this another look at to see exactly what's fundamentally different in here, and whether or not it's actually an improvement over the original bootleg that I reviewed a while back. So as we're getting the thing unboxed here, as you can see, unfortunately, they still haven't quite fixed that whole I can't remember how the name of the suit goes, but basically they haven't fixed the fact that the eyes keep falling off on there. However, it still pegs in pretty well. And as I'm looking at my first impression here, I'm going to be honest, there are indeed a few issues that do need to be addressed here. Namely, the figure itself has not been assembled correctly right out of the box, as you can tell. While in terms of the main body, it does seem like most of the stuff is correct, if just a little odd fitting. However, you can probably tell right away that those elbows have not been inserted into the body correctly, and thus will be unable to bend. Now, technically this is an easy enough fix for the most part. You can just twist the joints back into place. However, at least on my particular model that I have here, I noticed that the elbow joints particularly have a nasty habit of turning back into the incorrect position for how it was stored the whole time, so that is something that does need to be addressed at a later point. Maybe I'll just do something in order to kind of thicken up the joints later, but your mileage may vary. You might not exactly have the same issue on yours if you try to pick up a more recent version of this bootleg as well. The next bit is probably the most glaring thing once you get past that little initial fitting thing, and that's the general finish of the figure has definitely taken a hit. Namely, you have bits that are like poorly painted, like the upper torso or the back bit, which is entirely the wrong color, meaning they've inserted the wrong thing on there. You got a bunch of paint smudges and stains here and there, and speaking of stains, I have no idea what caused this one whatsoever, as it's not only eaten into the slight gloss there, it's also taken the paint underneath there. So yeah, this figure's overall presentation could use some work. That being said, in terms of other little bits in here and there, they seem to actually be working a little more functional than I had on my original bootleg. Like, for those that remember, removing the hairpiece on my original one was basically a Herculean task because I think it was glued into place. However, it was still very hard to remove on this one, harder than it should be, but it could be done without having to basically put pliers to the thing. And the new faces and other faces fit in there pretty well, and are actually, all things considered, still pretty decently detailed. Although for some reason the faces themselves have a little bit more of a glossy finish compared to the rest of the body. Which is a bit weird, but not something that can't be fixed. It maybe like take a flat coat spray on top of it. Just something to keep in mind though. In terms of general articulation, I'm going to say this particular newer bootleg is about on par with what I had with my original one, if not a smidge better, just because of actual better fitting I would find, to be totally honest on there. Just to mention on my original one, I'll link to the video down in the description by the way, I was having some issues with the shoulders. At least one shoulder was a bit more stuck because of some scrap plastic on there. There's no such issue on here, it rotates entirely fine, same with the wrist joints. It's worth noting that the bikini piece is still oddly enough warped on this new one as it was, so I guess that's kind of a uniform defect in all of these different bootlegs. However, what I will notice a little different is one of the knees on mine is a little bit wobbly. It kind of moves back and forth side to side. However, all the joints on the knees and ankles actually fit a lot better on this new bootleg than they did on my original, which kind of elongated the joints as a whole, I would find. Now, rather than just verbally go over how the two different bootlegs are different from one another, I think it's about time we do a proper side-by-side, so let's do just that. Just for the record, new bootleg is going to be on the left, while original one is going to be on the right at all times. And as you can see there, they do have their pros and cons, namely the new one on the left there does honestly fit better in terms of all its various joints and limbs in this case because of the joint fittings, and thus is actually closer to the original height. However, the one on the right does have better paint applications overall, although neither one, as you can see, quite got the hair right. In this case, however, the rest of the paint colors on the right one are traditionally or technically more vivid, I find, and a little closer in terms of how they appear, at least to the press shots. Much cleaner applications, where the one that's going to be the newer one is a bit of a mess all over the place and definitely needs some work on the finishes. looking into the accessories themselves that come with the figure, we have the original version of the scissor blade here, which as you can see on both ends is roughly about the same build quality on both, being that they're made of a bit of a thinner plastic than what it really should have on the figure, as well as being a little more, or actually a little less glossy than what the real figure should have. And probably that's because it's using a lower grade plastic. However, they are functional enough to go with both of the bootlegs here. Moving on there, we of course have Ryuko's multiple faces. In terms of the differences between the quality, I find decal-wise they're about the same, honestly, with the new one being a little harder to see in person, although in camera it looks just fine here. However, in terms of that, I think the part of the reason I have a bit of a harder time telling the decals on seeing details on the newer faces is just because the plastic is also a bit glossier, as you can see here. It's more of a matte finish on the older bootlegs, whereas on the newer ones, because of the extra gloss, certain details, like in this case the slight blush feature, get lost in there just because you can't see it properly with the glare. Moving on to, I believe this is the decapitation mode version of the scissor blades. Honestly, it's the same thing as with the default one. It's functional, however the plastic is definitely too thin, and it's not quite the right finish. And speaking of not quite the right finish, the new hands I'm actually not a big fan of because of the very glossy red they're using on there. They could definitely use a bit of a more matte coat in order to fix things up. And last thing on there, just aside from the stand of course, is the set of instructions. Original one came with the purely Japanese text on it, just the kanji one. However, the new bootleg has it in English. Or I should say on both ends on there. Is there a real difference? Not really, but it's just an interesting thing to note. Now here's one bonus bit that I couldn't do with my original view, and that's because I didn't have the Figmas Suzuki at the time of that particular recording. And that's compared the scissor blade as well as its companion bit, which are supposed to form the full set of scissors. And this makes the difference between the actual scissor components that much more obvious to what I was mentioning earlier. As you can see with the real one that's on top there is an absolute difference of night and day, both in terms of the quality of plastic, which is also frankly a thicker bit of plastic compared to the knockoff there, as well as not just a shiny finish, that's basically a candy finish of a darker red compared to the base plastic that both of the bootlegs happen to use here. So we're going to put that one down, and even when we bring up the other one, which is basically the same thing, yeah, they don't quite match up there. So in short, it looks like I'm going to have to do a bit of a paint job if I want these to get these to blend a little bit better. However, the thing I couldn't do at the original time, because I didn't have it, is see how these two combine, because they're actually supposed to go together to form a full set of scissors. And as you can see here with the sample bit I use here, both of them will combine just fine. So if you happen to have the Bootleg Ryuko and the real Suzuki, you can use this feature. I find it a bit funny that both of them have their flaws. One has better fittings, but one has a definite better set of paint on it. Maybe there's a way to amalgamate the two in order to kind of make a more cohesive version of the knockoff, and then I'll just figure out something interesting to do with the other one. That'll be another project for another day though. Thanks for watching, catch y'all later.